Hey guys, tonight we slip into the silk-slippered shadows of Imperial China. The sky above Beijing is ink dark, the moon barely a sliver, and the stone courtyards of the Forbidden City stretch before you, mysterious, cold, and utterly silent. Well, except for the occasional crunch of your feet on gravel. Because guess what? You're the new palace lantern keeper. Yep, you. They've handed you a wick trimmer, a box of perfumed oil, and a scroll of protocols longer than a dragon's tail. Congratulations. But don't get too cozy, these aren't your average paper party lights. These are hand-painted, silk-wrapped, gold-fringed symbols of the Qing Dynasty's glory. If you mess this up, someone's going to notice. Possibly someone in a hat taller than your hopes. And let's just say that in this palace, a single crooked lantern could literally offend the heavens. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. Let's see how far this sleepy journey spreads across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It begins with a name you barely remember hearing as you were pushed through the crimson gates, Lantern Keeper. You thought maybe it was a joke. Until someone handed you a flame still dancing in a glass cup and pointed toward the outer concubines' hall. You trudged forward, clutching the flame like it's your last biscuit. The Forbidden City is enormous, like someone designed a maze and then asked, "Can we double this?" You're guided more by shadows than signs, the outline of eaves stretching above like the wings of sleeping dragons. Your first job? Light the decorative row of lanterns along the Vermilion Steps Bridge. Sounds simple. Except the lanterns are mounted 8 feet high, and your ladder wobbles like tofu on a plate. Every breath of wind threatens to snuff your flame or your dignity. These lanterns, you quickly realize, aren't just pretty ornaments. They are coded messages. One misaligned lantern can symbolize disrespect. An uneven row could imply imperial weakness. And the oil, oh the oil, must be scented just right. Too floral, and it insults the senior empress. Too musky, and the eunuchs start a rumor that you're courting someone. You're not. You don't even have time for lunch. As you ascend the ladder, your hands shaking, you hear footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. An official. He doesn't speak. Just watches. His embroidered robe whispers against the stone. You light the lantern, step down, and bow. He grunts once, and disappears into the dark like a stern hallucination. Later that night, another keeper, older, eyes like worn jade, leans close to you and says, "This job isn't about light. It's about tone." You blink. Tone? He nods. The emperor doesn't just want to see. He wants to feel a certain way. And that's your job now. You look around at the rows of glowing orbs. Their patterns of light fall in soft pools across polished stone, making the hallways feel dreamlike, unreal. Some are faint blue, almost lunar. Others are rich amber, warm and royal. All this, created with delicate silk, carved frames, and precisely chosen oils. You thought you were here to light lamps. You're actually curating imperial mood swings. Historically speaking, palace lanterns during the Qing Dynasty were serious business. They weren't just practical, they were political, ceremonial, and deeply aesthetic. Some were crafted from yak horn panels and others from fine gauze embroidered with phoenix feathers. Each one had a designated spot in the vast imperial blueprint. Light too much too soon, and you might disrupt a morning cycle. Too dim, and you'll offend the kitchen god. Yes, he exists. And yes, he judges. You soon find that some lanterns are sealed with tiny red stamps, imperial marks denoting they've been inspected. Others have hidden compartments. Why would a lantern need a compartment, you ask? The older keeper grins and says, "You'll find out. Or you won't." Your first week passes in a blur of stairs, oil, wind, and whispered protocol. You develop a callus from the wick trimmer and a permanent soot smudge on your cheek that no one bothers to tell you about. Every evening starts with an updated lighting plan, hand-inked by a court official who clearly hates you. One night, you light a corridor that leads nowhere, only to find out the next morning it was part of a silent procession route for an imperial prince being mourned. You weren't supposed to touch it. The penalty? Well, historians still argue whether palace punishments for lighting errors were real or ceremonial scare tactics. You're not interested in finding out. Eventually, you learn to pace your steps with the rhythm of dusk. Your hand becomes steady with the flame. You memorize the names of the lantern zones: Phoenix Chamber, Jade Echo Hall, Scholar's Crossing. You start to take pride in your path, in the silent beauty you leave behind. Then, one quiet night, as you kneel to replace a wick in the shadow pavilion, you hear it, a single, long exhale. You freeze. Behind a screen, someone unseen whispers, "Too bright tonight. We're being watched." You blow out the flame. No one tells you if you did the right thing. But when you pass the courtyard the next morning, the lantern you left dark has a fresh bowl of lotus seeds sitting beneath it. Someone approves. You're up before the rooster. Not the metaphorical one. There's an actual rooster somewhere near the servants' quarter who's clearly auditioning to be the next imperial alarm system. You shuffle out of your mat, rub the soot from your fingers, yes, it's still there from last night, and grab your supplies, trimmed wicks, scented oil flasks, and the smallest pair of embroidered shoes you've ever seen, which are definitely not for you, but will somehow end up on your lantern cart anyway. Today is maintenance day, which sounds so innocent until you're standing face to face with the royal lantern stockpile. Imagine an entire chamber, wall to ceiling, filled with lantern frames of every possible design. Wood, bronze, ivory, even jade. There's one shaped like a qilin that's missing an eye, and another made entirely of layered silk panels that change color depending on the angle of the light. Half of these beauties haven't been touched in years. Your job: clean, oil, restore, and document, without damaging anything, or sneezing. You begin with the basics. Most lanterns run on sesame oil or tallow wax. Sesame oil gives a sweet scent but burns a little smoky, perfect for the scholar hall's wear. Intellectual haze is apparently welcome. Tallow's got a brighter flame, but it can go rancid faster than your patience after skipping breakfast. You crack open the first lantern. Inside is a story, a used wick still curling like a blackened dragon tongue, old ash settled in the corners, and silk edges brown from long-forgotten heat. You use a feather brush to dust the inside panels, taking special care around the hand-embroidered plum blossoms. Some of these were done by retired imperial consorts. One wrong move and you're defacing court history, or a future museum piece. Historians still argue whether these consort-made lanterns were actual assignments or just a polite way to keep them busy and away from politics. There's a rhythm to it. Unscrew the bottom fastener. Remove the glass, or horn, panels. Check the frame for stress. Oil the joints so they don't creak during ceremonial processions. Nothing ruins sacred ambience like a squeaky lantern. You start humming. It's a little tune you picked up from the kitchen staff. Something about dumplings and destiny. The older lantern keeper walks by, raises an eyebrow, and says, "Careful. Some of these lanterns remember songs." You pretend not to hear that. Hours pass. You've polished a carp-shaped lantern with golden eyes, untangled a tassel that somehow knotted itself into a perfect symbol for disgrace, and accidentally inhaled enough camphor oil fumes to start seeing minor deities in the wood grain. Then comes the soot. It creeps. It clings. It doesn't care that your sleeves are white silk today. Soot is the rude uncle of the palace maintenance family. It arrives uninvited and never leaves. Lantern soot is especially devious. It lodges deep into carved symbols and turns crimson paint to brown if left alone. So you wipe, scrub, blow gently. Use delicate cloths soaked in vinegar water. Some lanterns require drying with fans made of crane feathers. The level of extra is imperial, obviously. You discover a hidden engraving on one lantern, tiny Manchu script, barely visible. You trace it with your finger, and later ask around. No one has a clear answer. Some say it's a maker's mark from a rebel artisan smuggled into court. Others think it was a secret prayer for safe passage during night storms. One guard swears it glows under moonlight, but only during the ghost festival. You'll check, eventually. Maybe. By midday, your sleeves are blackened at the cuffs. Your hands smell like cedar oil, sesame ash, and faint hints of lotus resin. And still, more lanterns wait. One is massive, probably used during the emperor's birthday celebration. It takes 2 eunuchs and a pulley system just to lower it. You're told to clean it, restore the hanging silk panels, and relight its central wick in time for an upcoming evening ritual. No pressure. While perched on a scaffolding, your foot slips. Not far, just enough to jolt your pride and slam your hip into a beam. As you're gripping the railing, heart pounding, the other keeper says casually from below, "Didn't fall. Good omen." You respond with a thumbs up and a silent vow to invent non-slip shoes for lantern workers. Later that day, you handle a strange one. It's carved from dark lacquer wood, shaped like a mountain. Inside, tiny glass mirrors reflect light outward, casting flickers like fireflies when lit. You stare into it for too long and swear you see something move. You blink. Nope, just sit floating. Definitely. And then, there's the silk. You thought you knew silk. But Palace Lantern silk is its own kingdom. It comes in sheer gauze, fine weave, double-sided embroidery. Some of it is dyed with crushed beetles. Others use indigo aged for years underground. Each panel is painted with symbols, cranes, waves, plum blossoms, and yes, the ever-watchful dragon. Replacing damaged panels is a whole ceremony. You need permission slips, a silk swatch match, and, if it's an imperial lantern, the silent nod of approval from someone with more titles than you've had hot meals. One time, you used the wrong thread to reattach a fringe. It was barely noticeable. A single strand of orange in an otherwise gold tassel. The next day, the lantern was missing. Vanished. You never found out if it was removed for correction or taken to a secret archive of mistakes never to be spoken of again. Oh, and here's a fun tidbit. Some lanterns are filled with dried herbs, mugwort, mint, even orange peel. Supposedly to purify the air or chase away demons. Or maybe to keep bored servants like you entertain with tiny ghost stories. By the time dusk rolls in, you've restored 10 lanterns, skinned your knuckles twice, and earned exactly 1 smile from the elderly eunuch who oversees storage. He says, "You did well. None caught fire." High praise. You light the last lantern of the day, just a test. The flame flutters behind gauzy yellow silk, casting warm light across the chamber. For a moment, everything glows soft and honeyed. You forget the cold stone underfoot. Forget the burnt fingers. You just see light. You wake up sore in places you didn't know had nerves. Your arms ache from scrubbing soot. Your fingers have developed a sort of sixth sense for wick density. And yet, there's something calming in the monotony, in the soft rhythm of brushing silk and the quiet puff of flame catching just right. Today, you're summoned to the northern chamber of Harmonious Blessings, which, despite its peaceful name, houses one of the more political hallways in the entire Forbidden City. Why? Because every lantern in this corridor signals something. And you, yep, still you, are now responsible for making sure none of it gets misinterpreted. The first thing you learn is this: hierarchy glows. Literally. The Emperor's private quarters? Rich amber lanterns, embroidered with 5-clawed dragons. Only dragons with 5 claws are reserved for him. Anything less and you're safe. Anything more and you're dead. His mother's wing? Lanterns dyed in gentle violet, etched with phoenixes and plum branches. Still regal, but softer. A message of aged power and grace. His concubines? Now that is a rainbow game you don't want to mess up. The higher-ranking ones get peony motifs and real silver tassels. Lower tier? Paper blossoms and just enough oil to suggest, yes, you still matter, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. You spend the day adjusting flame levels. Yes, that's a thing. Some rooms require dim, wavering light to suggest humility and reflection. Others need a sharp, brilliant glow that screams the Son of Heaven might walk through here. You never thought you'd need to control an emperor's vibe, but here we are. A scholar once told you that during the height of Qing court life, entire lighting arrangements were sent for imperial approval weeks in advance. The emperor wanted to know exactly what level of brightness would hit his retinas as he entered a hall. Historians still argue whether this was a matter of control or just a highly refined aesthetic obsession. It's midday now, and you're in the pavilion of scattered petals, preparing for an audience where foreign envoys will present tribute. Big moment. Your role? Ensure the lanterns near the main dais are placed precisely 22 steps apart, tilted at 14 degrees, and lit at the 3rd hour of the Shin period, which, conveniently, no one bothered to define exactly. You start pacing the measurements. 22 steps. Not 21. Not 23. There's a small feng shui argument happening 2 doors down over which lantern pattern will better represent cosmic harmony. You're handed 2 nearly identical gauze panels and asked which feels more welcoming but still politically intimidating. You pick one at random. They nod like you've just solved a Confucian riddle. And then someone mentions the lantern of the left minister. You freeze. That lantern has its own platform. It's placed near the central hall during specific ceremonies involving internal ministers. The problem? Its last caretaker misaligned it, and that led to rumors that the left minister was being subtly exiled. He wasn't. But the mere symbolism of that lantern being too far to the right caused a week-long flood of palace gossip. You clean the frame. Carefully hang the pale green silk. Adjust the flame wick just so, until it casts the right shade over the sandstone floor. A court official walks by, pauses, tilts his head. You don't breathe. Finally, he grunts. Passable. High praise again. After that near miss, you start seeing everything differently. Every flicker of light, every tassel length, every faded panel, none of it is random. Even the shadows serve a function. You overhear two eunuchs gossiping in the courtyard. Apparently, the emperor once changed concubines' sleeping arrangements based solely on how their lanterns looked from his viewing tower. One lantern looked too triumphant. The poor girl was demoted to laundry. Another had a perfectly soft ripple that reminded him of his mother's favorite pavilion. That concubine got promoted. Light and love, apparently, go hand in hand. You adjust a lantern near the whispering garden, aligning its reflection perfectly in the lotus pond. The older keeper walks by and mutters, "Good. The koi-like symmetry." He might be joking, but you realign it anyway. Lunch is brief, cold dumplings eaten in the shadows behind a storage shed. You swat away flies while scribbling flame-height notes in the margins of your scroll. Your handwriting now has a soot-blot signature. Trendy. Back inside, you're told to prepare a display for the visiting Mongol delegation. This means round-bodied lanterns, embroidered with snow leopards and wind motifs. The silk? Pale blue with white accents, meant to echo the Mongolian sky. You handle each with extra care, noting that the scent added to the oil is pine resin. Strong. Sharp. Intentionally so. The emperor wants the delegates to feel like they're still in the step, but elevated. You pause, mid-task, wondering, how many people in this palace have jobs entirely dependent on making other people feel slightly different through color, light, scent, and silence? Probably more than you think. Then, disaster nearly strikes. A younger keeper, newer than you, somehow, bumps a still-cooling lantern with his elbow. It tips, teeters. You catch it. Barely. But the frame is dented. You rush it to the workshop, apologize to the carved phoenix as you pry it open, and realign the metal. You'll have to repaint a corner. No one can know. Quirky side note? Some lanterns have built-in message flaps. They were designed during an earlier dynasty as a secret method of delivering notes, tucked behind the flame panel, only visible when lit from behind. You find one. No note inside now, just an old scorch mark shaped like a fish. That night, you dream about it swimming away. By twilight, you've relit 30 lanterns across 3 corridors, overseen 2 seating arrangements based on shadow spread, and witnessed a concubine reject a gift because the lantern it came with was too sentimental. You've learned that light isn't just for seeing, it's for saying. And as you walk back toward your quarters, the sky fades to deep navy, stars pricking through the haze. You look over your shoulder. Lanterns you've placed stretch in both directions, glowing, warm, purposeful. Like breadcrumbs of status and silk, guiding powerful people to their next move. And quietly, for the first time, you feel like a keeper of something larger than just light. Your lantern cart creaks louder than you'd like as you wheel it into the Eastern Hall of Everlasting Obedience, a name that makes you feel incredibly disobedient just by breathing too loudly. You've been assigned to refresh the lighting in this corridor because, and we quote, the ambience has become suspiciously cozy. Which is apparently a problem when a visiting censor from the provinces is expected. You roll your eyes inwardly, but outwardly you nod and bow and smile the way someone does when they know that even flame temperature is a topic of palace critique. You get to work replacing a row of lotus petal lanterns with sharper angled tiger-striped ones. Because nothing says we have nothing to hide like aggressive lighting. As you adjust the 5th lantern's angle, 32 degrees, as dictated by a scroll written by someone who clearly never held a flame, you catch a whisper from behind a painted screen. 2 voices, one urgent, one amused. One says, "Not here." The other, "It's just the lantern boy." "Excuse you." But you say nothing. You just keep polishing your brass hinge. Polishing, as if it's the only sound that matters. But now your ears are wide open. You're not sure what you're hearing, exactly, mentions of a message. A seal, something to be passed discreetly. The phrase "pass it by the wax fish" definitely comes up, which you're 90% sure isn't a menu order. Eventually the voices fade, replaced by slippered steps, and you pretend not to notice a folded scrap of silk tucked into the lantern base 2 paces behind you. You don't touch it. You're not stupid. But suddenly, you understand what the old keeper meant when he said light is about tone. The shadows cast here aren't just decorative, they're cover. Lanterns aren't just symbols, they're tools. And your job has just become a lot more delicate. You think back to a piece of court gossip you heard last week. A noble was quietly demoted after his garden lanterns were found burning blue flames during a memorial week. Blue flames aren't just inappropriate, they're historically associated with ghost energy, rebellion, and fire disasters. Historians still argue whether the color choice was accidental, or a political protest in silk. Later that evening, you're summoned to rework the lighting around the grand audience hall. You're not the only keeper there, this is a multi-person job. The vibe here is pure spectacle, high ceilings, gold thread banners, and lanterns suspended on 20-foot poles. You crane your neck so often you're tempted to request a neck brace from the imperial physician. One of the other keepers, a guy who never buttons his collar and smells like he eats garlic for every meal, grins at you. Ever wonder why they always schedule inspections the day after a full moon? You shrug. Less natural light? He laughs. More shadows. Easier to catch someone sneaking off the path. You chuckle, but now you're thinking about that silk scrap again. Maybe the lanterns are doing more than just lighting paths. Maybe they're also defining which paths aren't meant to be taken. While adjusting a lantern just beneath the hall's main beam, your fingers brush over a carved phoenix tail and feel something odd, slightly loose. You press, and a panel shifts. A hidden compartment. Empty, of course, but your brain fires off questions like a dragon sneezing. Later, while sipping your evening broth, you ask the old keeper if he ever found secrets in the lanterns. He lifts one eyebrow and replies, "I once found a tooth." You stare. A tooth? Human. Wrapped in silk. With a poem stitched in red thread. I put it back. Naturally. The next day, your lantern assignment takes you to a lesser-known corridor called the Whispering Walk. It's rarely used, mostly by messengers and junior scribes, but the lighting there has to be just right. If it's too dim, it feels haunted. Too bright, and the stone echoes like a tomb. Your job is to make it feel neutral. Inconspicuous. The kind of lighting that says, "Don't notice me unless I'm gone." You finish hanging a newly restored lantern, white gauze, scented lightly with clove, and step back to admire your work. As the flame catches, it casts long shadows that dance along the engraved walls. You squint. Some of the carvings don't look decorative. They look functional. You lean in. One panel shows a stylized crane with its wings mid-flight. Inside the feathers, tiny etchings. Manchu script again. You make a mental note to ask the eunuch translator next time you cross paths. For now, you document the design in your notebook. That night, the senior keeper pulls you aside. He lights a thin candle and draws a rough map on your workbench with ashes. "These halls," he says, "aren't just walls. They're channels. Light them right, and you can guide a man anywhere." Guide him to what? To discovery. To disgrace. To desire. Depends who's holding the flame. You stare at the flickering candle. "And who am I?" He smiles. "You're the match." The joke should be cheesy, but it sits uncomfortably close to truth. From then on, you're more careful with how you move through the palace. You start to notice the patterns. Certain lanterns are never lit unless the emperor is present. Some flicker only when a concubine has left her quarters. One particular lantern, near the 5th garden arch, is always relit by a different keeper, who wears an odd medallion and never speaks. You realize this isn't just about decoration anymore. There's an entire system of unspoken cues. Light is language. Flame is signal. You ask around discreetly. Most people pretend not to know. One young maid giggles and says, "Some say the lanterns know more secrets than the ministers." Then she looks over both shoulders and scurries off. From then on, every time you trim a wick or polish a horn panel, you wonder, what messages did this lantern carry before me? And who's watching from the shadows now? Your calendar is no longer measured in weeks, but in festivals, specifically, how much silk you'll be swimming in before each one. And today, the big one looms. It's nearly Lunar New Year, the single most lantern-intensive event on the imperial calendar. You're not just lighting for ambience now, you're decorating the heavens, one silken flame at a time. The entire palace is transforming. Servants string red and gold banners across gates. Courtiers rehearse their bowing angles. The Empress Dowager personally selects which lantern designs represent appropriate levels of festive dignity, a phrase that sounds suspiciously like a threat. You're handed a scroll titled Approved Lantern Forms, Year of the Rabbit Edition, and a drawing of a lantern shaped like a turnip. It begins. Your assignment? The east-facing promenade near the Pavilion of Blossoming Eternity, where the noblewomen parade in embroidered gowns, pretending they're not ranking each other based on who got the prettier lantern. This is decorative war. You and 4 other keepers haul carts of lanterns, round, gourd-shaped, even one modeled after a lotus flower blooming midlight. They sparkle with tassels, fringe, tiny painted scenes of cranes dancing under willows. One even plays a tune when the wind moves through it. You rig it to face northeast. Why? Because the northeast wind is auspicious this week. Obviously. And if you think that's specific, wait until you hear about the oils. Special blends arrive in lacquer jars, labeled with names like Fire Orchid and Dragon Cinnamon. Each one burns with a different hue and scent. You're told to mix 2 parts golden sandalwood with 1 part osmanthus bloom for a reassuring but subtly powerful vibe. Because that's exactly how you want the visiting Manchurian delegates to feel, calm, but aware that the empire could sneeze and level their entire lineage. Meanwhile, rumors swirl. Someone says the emperor plans a surprise appearance. Someone else claims the concubines have been rehearsing a lantern ballet. Someone else swears the lanterns are cursed if placed in prime numbers. You try to focus. You're threading crimson silk through the frame of a deer-shaped lantern when a eunuch bumps into your cart. A tiny lacquer box tumbles out. He doesn't even glance at it. Just mutters festival madness and scurries off. You open the box. Inside is a spool of golden thread and a paper charm marked with an unfamiliar sigil. You ask the old keeper about it. He squints. That's a luck tether. Used for what? He lowers his voice. Securing fate to form. Tying intention into decoration. You blink. I thought we were just making pretty lights. He chuckles. You think a palace this big runs on logic? Historians still debate whether these charms were genuinely believed to affect fate or were just symbolic gestures to satisfy ancient customs. Either way, you're told to tie the thread into the central lantern display, so, fate, here we go. Preparations stretch well into the night. The courtyard fills with scaffoldings, strings of colored silk, and enough oil jars to make you question fire safety standards. You're up a ladder attaching a crimson phoenix tail while a concubine passes below, trailed by 2 giggling maids. She looks up, eyes meeting yours for half a second, and says, "Make it shimmer. This here must shimmer." You nearly drop your lantern. The night before the festival, the entire Forbidden City seems to hold its breath. Musicians rehearse in muffled corners. The scent of sweet rice dumplings wafts through the halls. Somewhere, a string of fireworks is tested and fails spectacularly. You hear someone shout, "Not again." You head to the garden lantern prep area. It's been cordoned off with brocade rope and guarded by 2 particularly grim eunuchs. Your clearance gets you in, barely. Inside, hundreds of lanterns sit waiting, some shaped like stars, others like mythical beasts. One even resembles a cloud, puffy silk stuffed around a glass frame, lit from within by 3 tiny wicks. You swear it changes shape every time you turn your back. Your final task for the evening, light the Harmony Arch. It's a bridge flanked by twin dragon lanterns, each the length of a banquet table, with curled whiskers and mirrored eyes. They must be lit simultaneously. If one is late, it's seen as a bad omen. You and another keeper coordinate with the desperation of 2 people who know an empress once threw a fan at a servant for mismatching cherry blossoms during spring ceremony. You time it perfectly. The dragons blaze to life, casting rippling golden light across the water. You exhale. Then comes a sound you didn't expect, applause. You glance up. Courtiers on the balcony. The Empress Dowager among them, watching. She doesn't clap. Of course not. But she nods. And that nod? That's your entire raise. You're allowed to sleep for a few hours, but your dreams are all fire. Not nightmare fire, more like enchanted fire, weaving into forms. A glowing rabbit chases a flaming deer through a corridor shaped like the moon. You wake up just as the rabbit vanishes behind a silk curtain. Festival day arrives. The Forbidden City glows. Every doorway, gate, and corridor shimmers in soft firelight. Music plays. Dancers twirl. Children of high officials parade with lanterns shaped like their birth animals. You pass one carrying a snake-shaped lantern that hisses steam. You sincerely hope that's intentional. By mid-afternoon, your feet have gone numb. You've lit, adjusted, and realigned over 70 lanterns. You've learned how to bend colored filters over flame bowls to create purple light, rare, elegant, and symbolic of long life. You've dodged two noble women arguing over tassel placement and broken up a minor scuffle between two apprentices fighting over silk thread. By nightfall, the lanterns bloom. It's hard to describe unless you've seen it, thousands of glimmers across curved rooftops, casting their colored light onto snow-dusted courtyards. The red silk seems to breathe. The gold thread flickers like tiny constellations. You find yourself standing at the edge of the central court, sweat-soaked and ash-dusted, staring at your handiwork. The emperor walks the path ahead, his shadow trailing behind in waves of soft light. Lanterns rise on either side, not just illuminating, but elevating him. And somewhere behind a screen, you swear you hear that phrase again, "It's just the lantern boy." Maybe. But tonight, you lit the empire. You're summoned to the Crimson Lotus Pavilion before sunrise, a place usually reserved for court painters and high-minded scholars who like to sigh wistfully at mountains they've never actually climbed. You're still picking soot from under your nails when a steward hands you a scroll with very precise, and very nerve-wracking, instructions. The Emperor has requested that tonight's lanterns evoke the brushstrokes of eternity. Great! Because, obviously, you have a degree in abstract poetic metaphors. Still, you know exactly where this is heading. There's a rare category of palace lanterns that aren't really about light at all. They're artworks, commissioned like murals, painted not just on silk, but within the layers of light they emit. And tonight, you're responsible for one of the most temperamental masterpieces in the collection, the floating crane lantern. She's a diva. Stored in a jade-lined box, her frame is made of bone-carved supports thin as chopsticks and layered with silk so sheer it's practically whispering to you in Manchu. The painting? A flock of cranes rising from a misty pine forest, with silver threads stitched through to mimic falling snow. It's not just decorative, it's symbolic of longevity, virtue, and the imperial legacy. Historians still debate whether the original design was done by a court artisan or a retired calligrapher in mourning. Either way, if you damage it, your punishment will be swift and poetic. You clean your hands 3 times. You bow before opening the case. You murmur a prayer to the kitchen god, just in case he has pull with the lantern spirits. The tricky part isn't just lighting it, it's lighting it right. The silk shifts color depending on the oil blend used. Too dark and the cranes vanish into gloom. Too bright and the silver thread glares like an angry ghost. You blend your oil carefully, 1 part sandalwood, 1 part sweet almond, and a single drop of chrysanthemum essence for clarity. The flame flickers, flares, then steadies. You rotate the lantern on its stand, watching as the cranes seem to lift gently from the silk. They're flying now. Not actually, of course, but the illusion is enough to make you gasp. Light paints their wings mid-motion, shadows filling in the negative space like ink on rice paper. You're not crying. It's just the almond oil fumes. Other lanterns await your attention today, but none quite like this. You move through the pavilion, inspecting pieces that blur the line between function and fine art. There's the Moon Gate lantern, with a circular frame and glass inserts etched with shifting mountains. When lit, the mountains appear to move with the flame, like they're breathing. You carefully relight it using beeswax, which produces a clean flame and doesn't distort the illusion. Your wrist aches from holding the matchstick just so, but the effect is worth it. The painter's vision comes alive again, 1,000 nights after the final stroke. And then there's your favorite oddity, the shadow paint lantern. It's not painted on the lantern itself but behind a translucent panel. Card shapes sit within the chamber, so when you light the wick, their shadows project onto the silk. It's reverse painting through absence. A scholar once told you the shadows tell a different story depending on the angle of the flame. You test it. From one side, it's a bamboo grove. From another, a tiger mid-pounce. Lanterns are like stories, the old keeper says, appearing beside you as if conjured by dust and timing. You think you're seeing one thing, but you tilt a little, and it's something else entirely. You nod, suddenly feeling like you've just read a philosophy book by accident. Around midday, a noblewoman enters the gallery with 2 servants. She wants to borrow inspiration for her poetry recital tonight. You're told to light 3 different lanterns and adjust their angles until she feels moved. She says things like, "No, that shadow feels too tragic, and could we aim for melancholy, but the quiet kind?" You fight the urge to say, I'm a lantern keeper, not an emotion engineer. But hey, she tips you a candied plum afterward, which you immediately share with the pigeons because your stomach is still recovering from last week's overoiled dumpling incident. Mid-afternoon, you're given a special delivery, a new silk panel for the fisherman's lantern, a rarely seen piece that depicts a twilight river scene, complete with tiny stitched figures casting lines into embroidered water. It's beautiful, but the proportions are slightly off. The new panel shifts the horizon, making the fisherman appear to be standing on air. You report it to the steward. He frowns, mutters something about optical betrayal, and rushes off with it tucked under his arm. Later, you hear whispers that the artisan responsible may be reassigned to counting lacquered spoons in the western wing. As night falls, the emperor arrives to inspect the evening's lightscape. He glides through the pavilion in silence, his sleeves trailing behind him like the edge of a painting. He stops before the floating crane lantern. He says nothing. Then, just before walking on, he murmurs, "Their wings are lighter tonight." You think that's good? Probably. After he leaves, the old keeper claps you once on the shoulder. He only speaks to the flame when it speaks first. Sure. Totally normal job. Before sleeping, you take a private walk through the pavilion, all lanterns now lit. It's quiet, warm. Shadows play across the walls in shapes that feel ancient. You pass the crane again. The stitched wings seem to dip and rise with your breath. You realize something. These lanterns aren't just decoration. They're the palace's way of remembering. Each thread, brushstroke, and flicker tells a piece of someone's story, woven into light. And now, you're part of it too. The summons arrives on rose-colored paper, never a good sign. You're pulled mid-oil mix from your prep bench and told, with less ceremony than a dumpling wrapper, the emperor requests your lantern expertise in the Hall of Celestial Clarity. You nod like this is completely normal. Internally, your thoughts are doing backflips. This is not normal. The Hall of Celestial Clarity isn't just another palace wing, it's the emperor's personal space. Not quite his bedroom, but not far from it either. It's where he reads secret scrolls, plays with priceless antiquities, and, according to one eunuch with suspiciously twitchy eyebrows, broods during thunderstorms. And now you've been summoned there to, what? Fluff the ambience? You're escorted by two stone-faced guards who absolutely do not respond to your casual joke about bringing a spare wick in case of existential crisis. They walk you through corridors you've only glimpsed from afar, into the quiet heart of imperial solitude. Inside, the hall is darker than expected. Not ominous, but intimate. Heavy brocade curtains dim the sunlight. The scent of rare incense hovers like a question. At the far end, under a dragon-framed canopy, the emperor reclines, half hidden behind a folding screen painted with cranes and snow-covered pine. You're told, very gently, to adjust the lighting, which is like being handed a brush and asked to touch up the Mona Lisa. You move slowly. A single misstep and you're either banished or immortalized as that guy who singed the emperor's silk sleeve. The lanterns here are unique. They're mood lanterns, each one tuned to a specific feeling. There's one with blue gauze and cloud-shaped panels meant to evoke contemplative stillness. Another, lit with a blend of cinnamon bark and river mist oil, emits a faint reddish hue that suggests power without intimidation. Your job is to balance them. No pressure. You dim the blue one slightly, too much and it feels cold. You add a whisper of sandalwood to another. You lift a mirrored lantern just a hair to catch the emperor's book table in its glow. And then, from behind the screen, he speaks. Tell me, the emperor says, do the flames obey you, or do you obey the flames? You blink. Consider your options. I try to listen, your majesty. A pause. Then, HM. That's it. Just HM. You suppress a full body sigh of relief. And here's a fun historical tidbit. Qing emperors were known to take personal interest in the palace's decorative arrangements. Emperor Qianlong, especially, wrote poetry inspired by lantern shadows. Historians still argue whether this was a genuine aesthetic passion or just an excuse to micromanage. Either way, you're now a character in the next verse. You spend the next hour in slow-motion choreography. Adjust a tassel here. Trim a wick there. Every movement filtered through instinct, training, and sheer survival instinct. The old keeper once told you, lighting for the emperor is like playing chess against the wind. And the wind cheats. Eventually, the emperor exits from behind the screen. You keep your eyes respectfully lowered. He pauses by the lantern you adjusted last, the cloud panel one, and says, "Better." It breathes now. Then, just like that, he's gone. You exhale so hard you nearly blow out a nearby lantern. One of the eunuchs hands you a cup of tea, which you drink with the reverence of someone who has just escaped execution by ambience. You're escorted back to the general halls, where your co-workers pretend not to be impressed. One offers you a dumpling. You eat it even though it's suspiciously cold and probably from yesterday. Back at your workbench, you receive a new scroll, your updated lighting schematic for the Emperor's private study. You're now officially part of the inner illumination circle, which sounds fancy until you realize it just means even less sleep. But the perks? You now have access to the Imperial archive of lantern forms. And that is where things get weird. Inside the archive, tucked between endless scrolls and silk samples, you find records of experimental lanterns, some never used, others confiscated after incidents. One is described as a flame suspended in water, held aloft by glass veins. Another, a whispering lantern that emits low murmurs when lit. Probably just expansion noise in the wood, but one scribe claimed it spoke his name. You also find designs that seem futuristic, not just in decoration, but in intention. One scroll speaks of emotion-responsive lanterns, flames that grow or shrink based on the presence of specific individuals. Whether these were ever built, no one knows. But the idea chills you and excites you. Because if lanterns can respond to emotion, then maybe they already do, and you've just been too distracted by soot and tassels to notice. As evening falls, you're asked to return to the Hall of Celestial Clarity. Just to refresh the scent oils, they say. This time, you bring a tiny vial of lotus seed oil, light, neutral, reflective. You replace the dish, trim the wick, and turn to leave. But something stops you. The Emperor's chair is empty. But beside it, atop a lacquered side table, sits a single unlit lantern. Round, plain. No tassels. No color. Just white silk stretched tight over a perfect frame. You hesitate. Then light it. The flame takes slowly, reluctantly, as if weighing your worth. And then it settles, soft, even, pure. For a moment, the room glows not with power, but with peace. You realize you're not just lighting a room anymore. You're lighting a life. Night shift. You're starting to think the palace runs entirely on shadows and whispered regrets. When the sun dips behind the palace walls, and the temperature falls just enough to make your joints creak, that's when your shift begins. You're sent to the western core of Fragrant Harmony, a place that sounds serene until you realize it's a cluster of concubine residences, and a magnet for drama. You pull your lantern cart through moonlit corridors, wheels squeaking just loud enough to announce your presence to every restless servant and prowling cat. There's a chill in the air, but the oil warms your fingers as you prep the first lantern. The flame dances gently, casting golden rings on whitewashed walls. Then you hear it. Not footsteps. Not whispers. A laugh. Light, fluttery, the kind that follows flirtation. You glance around. Shadows move. A breeze lifts the corner of your robe. You pretend not to notice the silken rustle behind the screen to your left. You light another lantern. This one flickers oddly. You lean in, and just as you adjust the wick, a blur darts past your leg. You leap back. The lantern sways dangerously. It's a cat. A white ball of fur with a silk ribbon tied around its neck. And now it's scaling your cart, eyes locked on your oil satchel like it's made of tuna. You gently shoo it off. It flicks its tail like you've insulted its ancestry and disappears into the shadows. That's when the real trouble begins. A young concubine appears. You recognize her, Lady Shu, not the highest ranking, but famously dramatic. She frowns, fans herself theatrically, and points at your freshly lit lantern. "That one's too bright," she says. You nod, bow slightly, and adjust the wick. Now it's too dim. You try again. Now it's suggestive. You freeze. Suggestive? She narrows her eyes. It's casting flirtatious shadows on the column. You look at the column. It's a column. A very chaste, deeply indifferent piece of architecture. But you adjust the lantern anyway. 3 times. Eventually, she flounces away, muttering about the declining standards of imperial illumination. The older keeper once told you, it's not about what they see. It's about what they feel they're being seen as. You begin to believe him. Later, you're sent to the Night Flower Bridge, a narrow walkway flanked by lanterns designed to mimic blooming peonies. You're halfway through replacing their oil when 2 eunuchs approach, deep in conversation. She said he delivered a love poem with his lantern. No! What kind of lantern? A peach blossom frame. With cinnamon oil. You can't help yourself. Is that a known romantic configuration? They glance at you, startled. One shrugs. If it makes her heart stir, it counts. They move on, leaving you with your blossoming lanterns and the realization that lighting arrangements have become a proxy for palace flotation. You start noticing it everywhere. A lantern trimmed in gold that's inexplicably left burning outside a young nobleman's study long after his shift. Another scented with neroli oil, a known aphrodisiac, placed conveniently near the moon-viewing pavilion. And that strange instance when a concubine requested a very specific lantern color, like the inside of a ripe persimmon, just before an imperial poetry contest. Historians still argue whether palace lanterns were ever used for coded messaging between lovers. The records are suspiciously blank. But the evidence is written in the silk, if you know how to read it. One night, while trimming the wicks in the orchid breeze corridor, you hear hushed voices, two servants, a male and a female, speaking low and close. You can't see them, only the play of their shadows cast by your lanterns on the wall. Their hands nearly touch. You realize your lantern placement has created a private alcove of intimacy where none should exist. You move one flame a fraction to the left. The shadows vanish. The lovers never notice. Sometimes you're a matchmaker. Other times, a censor. And occasionally, just a witness. You pass a garden path, softly lit. A lone concubine sits beneath a plum tree, gazing at the lantern in her hand. You recognize it, it's one you adjusted earlier. Pale blue gauze, trimmed with silver thread, scented faintly with winter jasmine. She doesn't notice you. She just lifts it slowly, watching the light shift across her face. Then she sighs. It's the kind of sigh that carries all the longing, boredom, and careful heartbreak of someone who wears beauty like armor. You light another lantern behind her, not because it's your duty, but because it softens the sharpness of her shadow. Later, you find the white cat again, this time curled inside your oil crate. Sleeping. Like she owns the place. You let her stay. She probably does. One final task for the night, the midnight pearl lantern. This one's special. Hung outside the chamber of a favored imperial consort, it must burn steadily from dusk until dawn. It's made of pale horn, with a single carved dragon curling across its surface. The flame inside magnifies the dragon's eye, making it appear to blink. You adjust the wick, check the oil, and step back. Someone clears their throat. You turn. It's a court musician. He bows and says, "Thank you." That light, it helps her sleep. You nod, unsure what to say. The palace doesn't often reward kindness. But in that moment, you feel like your flame matters more than the silk it dances through. You finish the shift with your hands smelling of jasmine oil and your sleeves smudged with soot. You pass through the courtyard, where the last of the lanterns sway in the breeze, glowing like tired stars. And as you return to your sleeping mat, the image of that sighing concubine, the whispered flirtations, and the shadow alcove lovers drift through your thoughts. You're not just lighting the night anymore. You're lighting moments. They say the palace sleeps after midnight. Whoever said that has clearly never seen the inner court night market. You're assigned to lantern patrol again, this time in the southern corner of the Forbidden City, past the echoing stone path and through a gate guarded by a very bored rooster who apparently got demoted from morning duties. You slip through the archway, lantern in hand, and find yourself in a part of the palace rarely mentioned, even in whispers. And suddenly, light. It's not like the ceremonial halls. This glow is casual, clustered, chaotic. Tiny lanterns of all shapes dangle from ropes and poles. Warm white spheres, dyed gauze pouches, miniature dragons and rabbits on string. Some even blink, though you're pretty sure that one's just a trick of the breeze. It's the market for the elite, a kind of secret midnight bazaar tucked within palace walls. Not open to the public, of course. No coins exchange hands. The vendors? Mostly older palace staff, low-level officials, widowed concubines, and the occasional bored prince with too much silk and not enough supervision. You're not supposed to linger. Technically, your job is to maintain flame levels along the vendor stalls. But no one stops you. Because tonight, you're just another moving flame among many. First thing you notice, the food stalls. Someone's steaming rice cakes laced with osmanthus syrup. Another booth sells roasted chestnuts wrapped in lotus leaves. You pass a tray of sugared hawthorn slices shaped like lotus petals. Your stomach whines like an unattended zither. You trade a small favor, tightening a tassel on an overworked vendor's lantern, for a dumpling so hot it nearly burns your tongue. Worth it. Then the objects. A stand sells glowing mushrooms, yes, actual fungi. Pale blue caps that emit the softest bioluminescent shimmer. They grow in caves, the vendor whispers, but bloom under moonlight. You're pretty sure that's not medically accurate, but you want 5. Another booth offers incense sticks wrapped in scroll fragments. One stick claims to summon dreams of snow. Another claims it'll make your enemies confess. You pocket the snow one. Just in case. You pause at a booth with tiny glass lanterns no larger than a coin. Inside each, a hand-painted scene, backlit by a speck of glowing mica. One shows a waterfall. Another, a scholar reading beneath plum blossoms. You hold one up to your lantern's light and the waterfall seems to move. The vendor, a woman with hair like woven silver thread, says quietly, they hold memories. Someone's. You don't ask whose. Further in, the crowd thins. You spot familiar faces, a scribe you lit a corridor for just last week. A young concubine trailing an attendant, snickering over something sold in a silk pouch. And then, unexpectedly, a eunuch you only know by reputation. They say he controls the wardrobe inventory. He's quietly inspecting a lantern painted with black cranes. You adjust a nearby stall lantern, its wick too high, and nod at him. He nods back. Briefly. That nod may have just added 10 years to your safety record. Not everything here is sanctioned. That's obvious. Some of the lanterns bear non-imperial symbols. One stall sells wax figurines shaped like mythic beasts. Another offers embroidered silk squares with coded stitching patterns. You recognize one as a known rebel sigil. The vendor smiles sweetly and says, it's just decorative. Historians still argue whether these midnight markets were tolerated as harmless indulgences, or quietly monitored for subversion. Either way, you learn quickly, don't ask, don't touch unless you mean it, and always keep your flame steady. Then you see her. A shadow leaning near a stall of music boxes. She's dressed plainly, too plainly for a concubine, too refined for a servant. She picks up a small lantern shaped like a persimmon, studies it, then sets it down. As she walks away, the vendor lights the lantern behind her. Inside, the flame dances over a painted poem. If the fruit stays unpicked, does it still sweeten? You don't realize you've been holding your breath until she vanishes down a side corridor. You move on. Back at your post, you notice a strange flickering. One of the lanterns near the silk vendor pulses unnaturally. You approach. The flame isn't unstable, it's filtered. Someone's placed a translucent green shard inside, causing the light to pulse in rhythm. Code. You look up. 2 men across the walkway nod faintly and walk in opposite directions. You say nothing. You relight the lantern properly after they leave. The market begins to thin out as the sky turns smoky gray. A few vendors douse their flames. A child, probably the daughter of a seamstress, yawns into her mother's robe. You help unhook a paper lantern shaped like a koi, now sagging with dew. And then comes the final stall. A lone table. No vendor. On it sits one lantern. No design. No tassel. Just white silk. Familiar. You bend down and light it. Inside is a single brushstroke of red ink, curving like a crescent moon. You wait. Nothing happens. But as you turn to leave, you hear a voice say, "Thank you." No one's there. You don't ask questions. As you push your cart back toward the palace halls, your hands chilled, your pockets smelling like hawthorn and sandalwood, you realize the lanterns here don't just illuminate, they invite. Secrets, symbols, moments too soft for daylight. And for one quiet night each month, under 100 silk canopies, the palace dares to dream. You're sent to the Hall of Auspicious Stillness, which, as you soon learn, is anything but still. The reason? A dowager empress has declared war on a particular shade of green. Not just any green, but the exact hue used on a series of lanterns lining her private walkway. You're informed that the unlucky lanterns must be removed immediately. The new ones must be in peach blossom silk, with lotus-fringed tassels, and scented with red sandalwood, but not the kind from last year. You have no idea what that means. But you nod anyway. Welcome to superstition season. It's not official, of course, but every palace worker knows this time of year is when omens begin showing up. A dropped tray in the wrong corridor, a teacup cracking at dawn, a lantern flickering too long before it catches. It's all read like prophecy. And guess who deals with most of the flickering? That's right. You. Today, you're reminded that palace lanterns don't just light space, they're symbols. Every color, shape, and scent has meaning, and you're expected to navigate this unspoken language like a monk reading weather from cloud patterns. Yellow silk is reserved for the emperor. Red brings fortune, unless it's overused, then it smacks of desperation. White is for mourning, except when paired with gold, in which case it represents divine grace. You once saw a lantern trimmed in black and white fringe. The next day, the steward in charge was reassigned to inventory storage barrels in the goat quarter. Coincidence? No one thinks so. You light a new lantern in the ladies' chamber. It burns too fast. You adjust the oil. The fringe catches a breeze and flutters against the wood panel, making a clicking sound that echoes like a distant knock. She blinks and says, "It sounds like death." You remove the fringe. Another lantern, meant for the outer courtyard, keeps casting shadows that look vaguely like letters. A passing scribe mutters, "Ghost script." You change the silk panel. The rumor spreads anyway. Historians still argue whether these bad omens were palace paranoia or deliberate sabotage disguised as superstition. But the effect is real. You become part lantern keeper, part spiritual negotiator. Someone requests a lantern shaped like a bat, symbol of happiness, but insists the wings must not be opened too wide. It's too eager. Bad luck. Another servant refuses to pass under a certain archway because a lantern hung there once swayed too hard during an eclipse. You're handed a map with emotionally volatile zones marked in red ink. No flame in the fox courtyard. No purple light near the fragrance gate. A concubine wants a lantern lit in her chamber exactly 23 minutes after sunset. Not before. Not after. You time it perfectly. She smiles, hands you a coin, and says, "My mother always said odd numbers make things last longer." You don't argue. Even the oils have to be blessed. A monk arrives to chant over a fresh batch of magnolia essence. He sprinkles something into the pot. When you ask what it was, he says, "Hope." You think it looked like pepper. The older keeper pulls you aside. "There's a balance," he says. "You can't give everyone what they want. Some superstitions cancel each other out. You try to honor one, you might offend another." You ask what he does. He shrugs. "I light the flame. Let heaven sort it out." One night, during a quiet shift, a junior servant sneaks up behind you and whispers, "Don't light anything during the tiger hour." You glance at the sky. It's close. You hold your breath. Your wick stays cold. Nothing bad happens, but your stomach churns the rest of the hour like it swallowed a live fish. The next day, you find a tiny talisman tucked into the base of a lantern you were about to light. It's made of rice paper, shaped like a peach pit, and covered in microscopic calligraphy. You show it to a scholar. He squints and says, "It's a ward against misfortune." But this character's wrong. Wrong how? It wards off wealth. You quietly burn it. After that, you become more cautious. You check silk panels twice. You realign tassels so they don't sway toward doorways. You whisper apologies to the flame when it sputters. Some might call it silly. But when the Dowager Empress strolls past your lantern display and smiles, just once, thinly, you know it wasn't for nothing. That night, you adjust a lantern near your sleeping mat. Just slightly, so the shadows fall soft and quiet. You fall asleep faster than usual. No dreams. Just warmth. Just light. You're woken early, again, but not by a rooster this time. By a court aide with a scroll and a tone that makes urgent sound like a personal failing. You rub sleep from your eyes and listen as he says, "The Emperor is receiving foreign guests tonight. The lighting must reflect respect, strength, and subtle curiosity." That's not a mood. That's a dissertation. But you bow, dress, and make your way to the Harmony Audience Hall, muttering about people who clearly confuse you with a full committee. This is where your more abstract skills are tested. Because tonight, the lanterns aren't just about brightness or shape. They're about emotion. You step into the hall, a vaulted chamber with lacquered columns and polished stone that makes even whispers feel 10 times louder. You pace the floor slowly, planning your placements. A lantern to highlight the throne, not too direct. A line of low lanterns along the side aisles to suggest depth and space. And near the entry, this is where you get clever. You choose round-bodied lanterns with blue silk for calmness, laced with crimson edges for strength. The flames are trimmed low to produce a mellow, flickering glow. As foreign diplomats enter, they'll feel both invited and ever so slightly examined. It's lantern-based diplomacy. You mix your oils carefully. Clove for energy. Osmanthus for warmth. A pinch of pine resin for gravity. The scent will settle subtly into the room's edges, too faint to notice outright but impossible to ignore entirely. You set each wick with meticulous care. Not too high. Not too low. You don't want shadow pools that could make the courtiers look sinister, or worse, tired. You've learned that even the pace of the flame matters. A jittery flicker suggests nervousness. A steady burn implies control. A soft pulse? Confidence without arrogance. Your mentor once told you, a good lantern display makes a ruler look wise. A great one makes him look inevitable. You aim for inevitable. But then the chamberlain walks in and ruins everything. He's holding a sketch. It shows a new arrangement, columns of light leading to the throne in a straight line. You try to protest, it'll create tunnel vision. It's too aggressive. He raises an eyebrow and says, "You're not here to be clever. You're here to be clear." So, you compromise. You follow the sketch, but swap two lantern types, using peach glow silk instead of crimson to soften the effect. And you switch one of the flame oils to lotus, subtly calming. He doesn't notice. The effect is yours. As twilight falls, you light the display. The room shifts. It becomes less a chamber and more a stage. Courtiers take their places. Scrolls are read. The emperor enters, robes whispering like thunder. You stand back, watching the way the light catches the silk of his sleeves, how the lanterns cast long lines along the floor, like a sunbeam frozen in procession. And the guests arrive. Dignitaries from the west. Their clothes are heavy and foreign, their eyes sharp. They glance up at the lanterns as they walk, blinking at the unusual hues. One of them pauses near a flame-filtered panel and says something in his language. The translator smiles. He says the light feels like a question. You grin. Later, a court official passes you in the corridor and murmurs, "He liked it." The emperor. He said it looked like the room was listening. That's the compliment of the season. After the ceremony ends, you're summoned to remove the lanterns. You do so quietly, reverently. Some of the foreign guests have left behind small gifts, coins, a carved bead, a square of cloth. You leave them untouched. But as you extinguish one of the central flames, you notice something odd, a shape etched into the lantern's inner frame. It looks like a fox. You're pretty sure it wasn't there before. You bring it to your mentor. He examines it, squinting. "Mark of the Artisans' Society," he says. "Lantern Makers' Guild. But why hide it?" He shrugs. Maybe it's not just a guild mark. Historians still argue whether the Artisans' Society was a secret network that coded messages into palace decor. A few believe they acted as informants, using symbols to track court movements. Others say it was just prideful craftspeople being mysterious. You choose not to think too hard about it. Until the next morning, when you find 3 fox marks on different lanterns, each from different wings of the palace. Coincidence? Maybe. But now, when you prep a lantern, you check the frame. You inspect the hinges. You light the wick with a bit more curiosity. As night falls again, you're asked to prepare a new display for a poetry reading. This time, the brief is simple, a lantern for every mood. You select amber for nostalgia, blue for longing, gold for joy, and lavender silk for quiet sorrow. Each is lit and placed to frame the event like punctuation around the poems. The courtiers don't notice your work directly. But when a line about winter longing is read, and the lantern beside the speaker flickers just so, you see someone's eyes glisten. You realize that you've learned how to speak without words, your phrases woven in silk and fire. You're not just a keeper of light now. You're a composer. You're elbow deep in sesame oil when a frantic steward bursts into the workshop, nearly toppling a stack of scrolls with his coat. "Calendar corrections," he gasps, urgent. You raise an eyebrow, because nothing about calendar adjustments sounds like an emergency. But then he adds, "The grand astrologer just issued a new reading. 3 solar terms have shifted. The procession routes must change. The lantern displays must be recalibrated." Ah. So it's one of those days. You wipe your hands, grab a fresh wick kit, and prepare to battle the most underestimated foe in the Forbidden City, time. Lantern duty may seem tied to dusk and dawn, but in the palace, light is expected to obey not just the sun, but the stars, the moon, and a 24-segment lunisolar calendar that someone updates whenever Mercury stubs its toe. Every new term brings lighting realignments. During grain rain, lanterns must burn cooler, casting shadows to match the season's softening. During white dew, the light should evoke distance and clarity. And during great cold, no lanterns at all in the central courtyard, lest they tempt ancestral frost. You don't make the rules. You just light around them. But today, the adjustments aren't just symbolic, they're logistical chaos. The emperor's morning ceremony was moved ahead by an hour to coincide with a lucky astrological window. Which means your east wing lanterns, meant to light the path with low amber tones, are now blaring at full dawn strength. Someone says the emperor squinted. That's your fault. Sort of. You sprint back to realign the flame height, muttering apologies to no one in particular. The outer walkways require recalibration, too. The Grand Calendar Keeper insists the lanterns along the orchid path must cast shadows only on the left side today. You'd like to ask the moon for clarification, but she's not answering calls. You re-angle the flame bowls, twist the frames. One lantern still disobeys. It keeps flickering right. You consider threatening it, but instead swap the oil blend, removing the cinnamon base and switching to ginger root distillate. It steadies. Ginger, 1, moon, 0. You pass a group of scribes updating the main time scrolls. One nods at you and says, "You must have a head for numbers." You laugh. Not numbers. Just rhythms. Because that's what it is. Lanterns aren't just decoration, they're tempo. They sync with rituals, poems, even breathing patterns. At night, you're summoned to the Hall of Primal Study, where the Emperor will spend 2 hours composing seasonal verse. He expects the lantern light to encourage introspection without stifling clarity. You bring your softest silk-shaded lanterns, colored like late autumn peaches. One is scented faintly with bamboo sap. Another emits a dusky blue, like twilight in a bowl. As you light them, you hear a eunuch whisper, "His Majesty believes the stars are listening tonight." You place a mirror lantern just so. It reflects the stars through the high window onto the parchment before him. You don't say a word. Later, a poet lady stops you outside the hall and says, "You made the stars right with him." You say, "I only lit what they gave me." Still, you feel warm. The old keeper tells you a story over soup. Once, a scholar missed a key examination date because the palace lanterns were set according to an old calendar scroll. He arrived a day late. They blamed the stars. But everyone knew it was a keeper's mistake. The poor man ended up sweeping pigeon droppings from the palace gates for 10 years. That's why, the old man says, you trust the calendar until the stars say otherwise. Historians still argue whether this story is true or just a cautionary tale shared to terrify new keepers. Either way, you check your scrolls twice now. You start to notice the subtle shifts. How the moon's pull changes the flame behavior. How certain oils burn differently on high humidity nights. How peach blossom-scented lanterns attract moths in late spring but not in late summer. You learn the difference. Between a solstice light and an equinox beam. Between a ghost gate glow and a tomb sweeping flicker. These aren't just names. They're a grammar of light. You're learning the vocabulary. One evening, you're called to light a lantern in the ancestral spirit hall. It must burn at the precise moment a ritual bell tolls. The astrologer counts down. You strike the flint. The wick catches instantly. The bell chimes. For a breathless moment, the flame pulses in perfect sync with the gong's echo. Someone whispers, "The ancestors approve." Later, you test a new design, a dual-wick lantern that shifts shadow direction as it burns. It's meant for solstice nights. The pattern it casts changes hour by hour. You tweak the flame heights, adjusting the burn rate to match the new season scroll. When you finally get it right, the shadows form a moving spiral across the stone floor. You laugh. Alone. Quietly. It feels like writing with fire. That night, back at your room, you unroll the newest calendar draft. 24 solar terms. 163 lighting configurations. You look at your worn hands, your soot-ringed fingers, and the soft glow from the practice lantern in the corner. You smile. Because you don't just follow the calendar anymore. You're in rhythm with it. The wind is up to something tonight. You can feel it the moment you open the supply room shutters. Cold, restless, playful in that slightly unhinged way that usually means something's about to go sideways. You were scheduled for routine relighting in the celestial garden walkway, a calm, open-air stretch flanked by plum trees and stone lantern bases carved with poetry. You had plans for a peaceful shift. The wind has other ideas. By the time you reach the garden, 3 lanterns are already out. One's been knocked sideways, the tassels tangled around the support beam like a silk noose. You sigh, crouch, and start untangling. It's fine. Happens every few months. You're not panicking. Yet, you get the first one relit easily enough. The second gives you trouble. The wind keeps teasing the flame away, as if daring you to try again. You shield it with your sleeve, hunching like a monk praying to the fire spirits. Finally, it catches. You're securing the panel when the third lantern decides to leap. Not fall, leap. A sudden gust lifts the entire frame, rips the hook loose, and sends the lantern tumbling like a wounded bird across the stone path. You run after it. Too late. It crashes against the base of a cherry tree, shattering the horn panel into a dozen pieces. And just like that, you're holding the broken frame of an imperial lantern in the middle of a storm, with a very inconvenient sense of guilt tightening around your chest. You drag it back inside, shielding it like a wounded comrade. You're halfway through cleaning up when a steward arrives with the worst possible expression: calm. Court official calm. Dangerous calm. His Majesty noticed the interruption, he says. He requests the lanterns be stabilized before morning. Stabilized his palace speak for perform a miracle. You nod, bow, and say, of course. Then the fun really begins. You consult the emergency manuals, the ones written in calligraphy so formal it's practically passive-aggressive. You find a section titled Wind Countermeasures and discover that your options include sand-weighted bases, wax-stiffened silk, wind-channeled diffusers, or, if you're truly desperate, guardian charms tied to the frame. You opt for all of them. First, weights. You mix tiny bags of polished river stones and discreetly tuck them into the base of each lantern. Second, reinforced ties. You use silk cord soaked in cedar oil, not standard issue, but more flexible than cotton in cold air. Third, flame protection. You rebuild the broken lantern using an extra frame from the archive, replacing the horn panel with clear clouded mica. Not as pretty, but stronger. And lastly, you dig into your secret stash and pull out a wind charm. A fringe of paper strips tied with copper thread, inscribed with ancient wind-warding symbols. The old keeper gave it to you once and said, for when the breeze starts whispering names. You tie it on. Just in case. Hours pass. You relight the path. One by one, the lanterns flicker back to life, now steadier than before. But the wind doesn't stop. It shifts. Circles. At one point it slams into you from behind, nearly sending your oil flask flying. You swear you hear it hum. Later, while checking the westernmost lantern, you notice something strange. The flame is steady, but the shadow it casts isn't. It moves irregularly, like someone's pacing just outside the circle of light. You swing your own lantern toward the garden wall. No one there. But on the stone path, you spot it, footprints. Not from your shoes. Smaller. Bare. Leading toward the Emperor's private tea pavilion. You don't follow them. That's above your clearance. But you do shift the lantern angle to erase the trail from sight. Historians still argue whether the palace windstorms were natural or engineered. One theory suggests the roofs and corridors were designed to amplify wind as a psychological tactic, reminding everyone of how small they were inside the Forbidden City. Another says it's just the architecture being difficult. Either way, tonight the wind feels personal. After everything is resecured, you retreat to the central fire basin to warm your fingers. The steward returns. The Emperor walked the path. He didn't trip. He said it felt like the moon was holding its breath. That's apparently a compliment. You're given a hot bun and half a nod. You call that a victory. Back in your chamber, you light a practice lantern and test a new knot for future storms. You tie it 3 times, tug once, twice, it holds. Outside, the wind roars. But inside, your flame stays still. And when you finally lie down, the glow from your lantern paints the ceiling with slow-moving waves. You think about shadows that don't follow the rules. About lanterns that crash but still get rebuilt. About wind that whispers and wicks that answer. And as your eyelids grow heavy, you realize, tonight, you didn't just fight the weather. You danced with it. You're called to the Imperial Library Hall at an hour when the moon's more awake than most people, and you know right away, this isn't a standard flame run. The request came on red-inked parchment, sealed with a lacquer stamp shaped like a lotus flower. That alone tells you this is upper tier. More than ceremony, less than state secret. Probably. The library hall is a curious place. Always dim, always cool. The windows are latticed to let in just enough natural light during the day, but at night, it's lantern-lit like a cave filled with warm fireflies. The scent here is unique: aged parchment, sandalwood, and a subtle waxy tang from 1,000 candle burns past. You enter quietly, as always, pushing your cart along polished stone. Lanterns here aren't for flair. They're purely functional. Simple wood frames, horn or mica panels, scentless oils. The focus is clarity. Too much ambience and a scholar might start imagining dragons in a census report. You're halfway through trimming the central reading room's lanterns when you notice one is missing. It's supposed to hang near the restricted stacks, the section no one mentions but everyone knows exists. You frown. Not just missing, gone. Hook empty. Wax smear below. Suspicious. You look around. No signs of maintenance. No prints. Nothing tipped over. So, naturally, you do the responsible thing. You relight the other lanterns and then go poke around the restricted section. You shouldn't. But you do. Just a quick peek. Just to check for fire hazards. The hallway narrows as you move in, lit only by your hand lamp. The scroll shelves here are deeper, older. You see one marked with characters you don't recognize, neither Han nor Manchu. It could be Tibetan. Or it could be code. You reach the back of the row and find something strange. A lantern. Still warm. Recently snuffed. Next to it, a scroll, half opened. You glance at it. Just a peek. You're not reading, exactly. It's more like absorbing. The title reads, Flame Paths and Celestial Shadows, a treatise on hidden light. Huh. You unfurl it a little more. It talks about shadow mapping, the practice of aligning lantern light to reveal inscriptions invisible by day. Diagrams show palace rooms marked with constellations, light paths traced like secret star charts. You blink. This isn't regular scholarship. This is architectural magic. You gently roll the scroll closed and replace it, almost. But then you notice the seal on the ribbon, the fox emblem again. That's the third time. You mark the location in your notebook, just in case. Back at your cart, you relight the reading hall lanterns with steady, slow-burning wicks. The room warms. Shadows deepen. A scholar enters, bows absently, then stops and says, You adjusted the flame height. You nod. It was burning too sharp. Bad for reading. He squints at you. It's better now. Like the light knows what not to show. You don't quite know what he means, but you accept the compliment. Later, an elderly eunuch sidles over. Find anything interesting in the stacks? He asks, too casually. Nothing flammable, you say. He hums. That's what they always say before something catches fire. As you pack up, a scribe hands you a sealed oil jar. For next time, she says. Moonbrute sesame. Makes the shadows slower. Slower shadows? That's a new one. You file it under things to test when no one's looking. Historians still debate whether the Imperial Library Hall held actual forbidden texts or just bureaucratic records too boring for public eyes. Some believe secret societies used lantern light to encrypt maps or letters. Others insist the mystery is exaggerated. But you know what you saw. That night, you test a flame from the moonbrute oil. The shadows it casts are thicker. Stickier, almost. They blur the edges of the room. Your notes appear smudged even when they're not. Fascinated, you try placing it behind one of your silk practice panels. The image it creates is layered. Almost like double exposure. You see one thing, then another. A plum blossom. Then a fox. Then nothing at all. It's probably just the oil. Probably. The next evening, a message arrives. The Emperor wants the library passage lanterns adjusted to reflect meditative discretion. That's court speak for don't draw attention, but make it impossible to lose one's way. You know just what to do. You craft a sequence, blue-hued lanterns with thin flame bowls and vertical silk ribbing. Each casts a narrow cone of light, guiding, not illuminating. As you hang the final one, you pause and watch the shadows stretch along the polished floor, fading perfectly at the final threshold. No drama. No spectacle. Just a quiet, invisible nudge toward understanding. You leave the library hall with ink-stained fingers and a head full of foxes. That night, you relight your room's lantern using a spare moon brood wick. The light pulls slowly, like honey. You open your notebook and begin to draw, not notes, not diagrams, just patterns. Shadows. Echoes. Something's unfolding. You don't know what yet, but it's lit. The lantern squeaks again. It's not a dramatic sound, just a soft little complaint, like silk shoes scuffing against polished stone, but you know that squeak. It's the same one you fixed last week, and the week before that. The lantern in question hangs in the side corridor between the Jade Mirror Hall and the Garden of Awaiting Autumn. Lovely name, cursed location. You haul your toolkit across the gravel path and squint up at it. Still swinging, still protesting every breeze, like a cranky uncle refusing to nap. You climb your stepladder, muttering to yourself, and gently grip the frame. The joint's loose. Again. You sigh, knowing what this means. The frame's warped. Age, humidity, time. It happens. You lower it and examine the joints. There's a fine crack running along the curve of the top strut, almost invisible unless the light hits it just so. You'll need to replace it. But this isn't an off-the-shelf piece. It's from a discontinued ceremonial set, hand-carved to represent the four harmonies. You'll need help, which is how you find yourself in the back corner of the lantern workshop, digging through the maybe salvageable bin with your elbows deep in half-frames, scorched tassels, and so many cracked fittings it feels like you've entered a graveyard of forgotten ambition. And then you hear the laugh. A low chuckle, coming from the rear workbench, where a figure sits cross-legged on a stool, trimming a horn panel with what looks like a knife designed for peeling cucumbers. His robe is patched. His left hand is missing its pinky. He's humming. "Ah," he says, without looking up. "You've got a rebellious lantern." You blink. "I'm sorry." "They squeak when they're ready to die," he says, as if this is common knowledge. But some don't want to die quiet. Meet Master Hua, semi-retired lantern fixer, unofficial archivist of imperial lighting, and, according to palace rumor, once assigned to light the lanterns for the emperor's wedding feast, until one caught fire and he lost a finger saving the silk canopy. He shrugs when you ask him. "Could have been worse. Could have been my eyebrows." You show him the broken frame. He squints at it, tilts it, sniffs it, for some reason, and finally nods. Cedar, old batch. Warped because it was sealed during rainy season. He picks up a chisel and sets to work. You watch, fascinated, as he shaves the frame down, smooths the edges, and reattaches a new cross strut with an ease that makes your own fingers feel like useless sausages. He whistles as he works, a tune you realize is the same one you've heard from the kitchen staff. Something about dumplings and destiny. Of course. While he works, he tells you stories. Half of them might be real. One time, he says, a lantern near the bridal chamber started crying. Crying? Every time someone walked past. Soft little weeps. We thought it was a ghost. Turned out, the oil wick was made with a bad sesame batch. Spoiled oil sings. He grins, toothless. Spooky, though. Another, they once tried to invent a heatless lantern. Used polished crystals and reflective panels. It lit up like the sun but melted its own tassels. You don't know what to believe, but you listen anyway. He teaches you how to tighten squeaky hinges using a paste of ginkgo sap and fish glue. How to soak silk in cooled rose water to reset its drape. And how to recognize a lantern that just doesn't want to cooperate. Some of them, he says, were made in anger. You can feel it. They'll never hang straight. Historians still argue whether lantern keepers like Hua exaggerated the personalities of their tools or genuinely believed lanterns had temperaments. Either way, you're starting to see his point. By the end of the evening, he's fixed not just your frame, but two others you didn't know were broken. You thank him and offer him one of your sesame buns. He accepts it like a treasure and says, "Next time, bring wine." You return to the corridor and rehang the lantern. It creaks once, then settles. Quiet. At peace. For now. The next few days, you notice more misbehaving lanterns, flickering when they shouldn't, drifting off angle, tassels mysteriously knotted. You start calling them was children. You keep a log. One lantern starts making a faint hissing sound. You take it down and find a small crack in the oil dish. It's been leaking, slowly, into the silk. A potential fire hazard. You clean it out, replace the panel, and light it again. It purrs. Literally purrs. Or maybe that's your own exhaustion humming. Another is cracked at the base, but only when you tilt it just so. You find a replacement carved with the plum blossom motif that exactly matches the season scroll. The chamberlain notices, says nothing, but writes a mark in his little book. Your repairs start gaining attention. Quiet attention. A steward starts leaving lanterns outside your room at night. A junior concubine once passes you in the corridor and whispers, "Thank you for the jasmine light." You hadn't known she noticed. One evening, you pass Master Ho's workbench and find it empty. Just a small scroll pinned to the seat. Every flame tells you what it needs. You just have to listen. You light your next lantern in silence, ears wide open. Tonight's task is ceremonial, but heavy. You're assigned to the Hall of Ancestral Radiance, where the imperial family will hold a memorial for the Empress Dowager's grandfather, a man whose name you've now written 14 times on lantern tags without ever learning anything about him except that he had very strong opinions about tea temperature. You arrive early. The hall is hushed, cavernous, and still smells faintly of old sandalwood and the quiet weight of reverence. A red cord seals the entry until lighting preparations are complete. You slip under it and begin. This isn't just any lantern display. It's the Ancestor Glow Ceremony, a strictly regulated event where every lantern is both tribute and signal, of grief, of remembrance, of legacy. Each flame represents a virtue. Each tassel length corresponds to a specific dynasty contribution. You'd laugh, but someone might hear and decide to assign you to shadow duty in the mausoleum vaults for a week. You've been given a scroll with exact placements. 108 lanterns. 9 rows of 12, forming a divine grid. Each row must burn at the same brightness, spaced 1.5 paces apart. The front row in white silk, second in muted gold, the others in descending shades of memory, blue for humility, green for foresight, plum for balance, and black for sacrifice. You light slowly, carefully, using specially blended oil infused with powdered amber and dry chrysanthemum petals. The scent is earthy, grounding. Some believe it draws ancestral spirits closer. Others say it just masks the faint mildew of the stone. The head steward inspects your first row. He says nothing, but he doesn't frown, which is basically a standing ovation. You press on. Midway through the arrangement, a novice helper asks why the lanterns must all face north. You explain that according to the Qing cosmology model, the north signifies stillness and origin. But the ancestors came from all directions, he says. You shrug. Still gotta follow the grid. Tradition doesn't negotiate. You finish with the central lantern, a massive one, almost half your height. It's crafted from yak horn and painted with a pale rendering of the imperial ancestor's face, faint enough that it only appears when lit. You trim the wick, adjust the frame, and strike the flint. The face appears. It's not comforting. You step back. Someone's watching you. It's the Empress Dowager, standing in silence behind a half-lifted curtain. She nods, once, then disappears without a word. Later, as you inspect the lantern lines, you overhear 2 scribes whispering. The plum row tassels were 2 inches longer last year, one says. Is that a statement? The other shrugs. Maybe it's a reference. Or maybe someone messed up. You freeze. Check the tassels. Perfect length. You allow yourself a silent fist pump. But the real test comes when the ceremony begins. The imperial family arrives in ceremonial robes, the emperor leading. They bow, chant, offer silk scrolls to the ancestor altar. Your lanterns burn evenly, shadows dancing in controlled rhythm. It's a quiet ballet of fire and stillness. Then, a gust. Not large, but enough to make the front row flicker. The rightmost lantern wobbles. You're already moving. Swiftly, silently. You step behind the row, adjust the counterweight, trim the wick back a hair, and shield the flame with your palm. It steadies. Crisis averted. After the ceremony, the steward approaches. The dowager is pleased. She said the lighting honored the silence of grief. High praise, if you squint at it. As you begin disassembling, you notice a small wooden tag beneath the central lantern. It's a name, one you don't recognize. Not the Empress Dowager's grandfather. You hand it to the older keeper. He turns it over, frowns. That's not part of the ceremony. Maybe it was a mistake? He shakes his head. Or maybe a request. Turns out, some families bribe low-level attendants to sneak names into the ceremony, trying to slip extra ancestors into the royal spotlight. It's a quiet scandal, one handled with silence. You leave the tag where you found it. Sometimes it's best not to know who's being remembered. Historians still debate whether these memorial lanterns served genuine spiritual purpose or were simply displays of imperial propaganda, an attempt to drape every generation of the dynasty in reverent firelight. Either way, the effect is potent. The shadows of the past walk among the flames. Back in your quarters, you light a single lantern for yourself. White silk, trimmed in blue, scented with cedar and something warm. You don't name it, but you let it burn. In that soft glow, you think of all the people remembered by light, and the many more who go unnamed. You think of flickers mistaken for failure, of flames that burn too quietly to be noticed, and of the quiet dignity in setting the stage for grief, then stepping aside so others may mourn. You're a keeper of light, but tonight, you're also a keeper of memory. And memory, you've learned, is a flame with its own will. You're halfway through adjusting the shadow throw of a phoenix lantern in the Serenity archway when something clicks. Not in your fingers or in the hinge, though yes, that did finally stop squeaking, but in your brain. You've been seeing the same motifs over and over. Not just repeating in a decorative way, but evolving. The lantern you're adjusting today has a double phoenix pattern. 3 days ago, you handled a single phoenix over peonies. A week ago? A phoenix and dragon in balanced flight. But this one, the double phoenixes are circling. Opposing. It's subtle. Maybe nothing. Or maybe a message. You pull your notebook out and start sketching the patterns from memory. A spiral. A mirror. Then a split. Every symbol means something in court decor. You know this. But now, it seems like some lanterns aren't just reflecting culture. They're recording politics. That phoenix spiral? It's hung outside Lady Xiang's chamber. Word is, she's fallen out of favor lately. The single phoenix and peonies lantern was outside her rival's quarters. Historians still argue whether lantern placement was used to influence or simply reflect power shifts. Tonight, you're leaning toward yes. You check the master scroll for lantern assignments. You're not supposed to, but nobody watches you that closely anymore. And there it is. A revised lighting pattern outside the Hall of Crimson Accord, the Emperor's favorite consort's residence. 3 lanterns, all featuring bamboo shoots and cranes. Symbol of endurance and elegance. 2 weeks ago? She had fish motifs, prosperity, but low-rank symbolism. That's a serious elevation. Someone's moving up. You take the long way around, through the southern meditation garden, where the lanterns always burn with a bluish oil blend and everything smells like introspection. There, you find another curious clue, a pair of lanterns switched in position. The one meant for the east gate, a tiger in moonlight, now hangs on the west. In feng shui, that's a direct inversion of energy flow. Could be a mistake. Or, a statement. You find the old keeper leaning against a wall, sipping tea that smells suspiciously of fermented plum wine. How long, you ask, have people been slipping messages into the lantern designs? He snorts. Longer than you've been alive. Maybe longer than the paint on these beams. You show him your sketches. He squints, nods. That one? He says, pointing at a lotus-wrapped turtle. That's a signal. Means someone's lying low and waiting. You blink. Waiting for what? Favor, he says. Or downfall. From that point, you start seeing patterns everywhere. The garden lanterns for ministers on probation always seem to feature more water motifs, suggesting reflection, or drowning. The concubines in favor? Birds. The ones fading? Blossoms wilting. It's subtle, masterful, and unless you're looking, completely invisible. You test the theory. You swap 2 lanterns, both of similar shape, color, but with opposing symbolic threads. A carp for Lady May. A goose for Lady Shu. By morning, Lady May is scowling and someone's maid has delivered new oil instructions marked to restore original ambience immediately. You're not scolded directly, but a eunuch asks pointedly if you're feeling well and suggests maybe you take a day off. You don't. Instead, you dig deeper. One lantern in the court of blessed scripts has a hidden flap behind the silk. Inside, you find a small painted symbol, barely visible unless the flame hits it from below. It's a spiral. The same spiral you saw outside Lady Xiang's room. When you show it to Master Hua, he grimaces. That's not a court design. That's old code. Artisan stuff. When the guilds still ran the messaging routes. You're digging in mud now, boy. But you keep digging. You track a series of lantern swaps over the last 2 months, watching as the motifs shift like a slow-moving play. Dragons recede, phoenixes rise. Tigers move from outer courts to inner sanctums. And the cranes, always the cranes, circling closer to the emperor's chambers. Someone's making moves. And they're using you to light the way. One night, you're ordered to hang a new lantern outside the Pavilion of Lingering Clarity. It's a relatively minor building, mostly used for private readings and low-rank official meetings. But the lantern is stunning. Not the usual parchment or silk. It's dark lacquer with inlaid gold, depicting a single moth flying toward a flame. You pause. That's not a good omen. You know your symbols. A moth chasing fire? That's destruction wrapped in beauty. You double-check the assignment. Confirmed. You hang it. The next day, a young official collapses during a private scroll reading. Rumors swirl. Poison? Overwork? The lantern? You're not told the outcome. But the next day, the moth lantern is gone, replaced by a standard red orb. You realize then, your job isn't just light. It's narrative. A visual whisper to those who understand the code. And someone high up, is using these lanterns to shape the palace mood, one wick at a time. You consider saying something. To the steward. To the Empress's envoy. But what would you say? That the crane lanterns are spreading like ivy? That the fish motifs are all swimming upstream now? You start leaving tiny notches on the backs of the frames. Just little marks only you would notice. So if someone swaps them again, you'll know. You've become not just a lantern keeper. You're a silent witness to power's choreography. And it's all unfolding in flame and shadow. You knew it was coming the moment the tassel tore. One moment, you're hanging a fresh lantern shaped like a teardrop chrysanthemum, beautiful thing, pale green silk in a soft inner glow that smelled faintly of pine and dried plum. The next, you're looking at its crumpled remains on the stone tiles of the silver plum gallery, surrounded by the horrified silence of two passing eunuchs and one very startled cat. You just committed the worst mistake in the decorative world of palace lighting. You broke protocol. Not just any lantern either. This one was part of the Eightfold Emblem series, a set reserved for highly specific imperial events, most of which involve ancestors, anniversaries, or awkward reconciliation ceremonies with nobles who may or may not have tried to poison each other. The worst part? You weren't even supposed to hang it there. You had the wrong hook. You know it's serious when your supervisor doesn't even raise his voice. He just sighs, deeply, and says, "I'll send word to the steward of rotations." That's the official in charge of punishments, reassignments, and, occasionally, strategic exile. By the next morning, your name's been quietly moved on the rotation list. You're no longer assigned to the central halls or any ceremonial passageways. You're being sent to a place that everyone in the Lantern Corps refers to only as Outpost East. No one says the full name. No one wants to. You're issued a worn-out cart with 2 wheels that squeal like anxious mice, 3 chipped oil pots, and a lantern manual written in such dense classical Chinese you wonder if it's a curse. The journey to your new assignment takes an hour, past storage sheds, low servant quarters, and into the outer rim of the palace complex. It's technically still inside the Forbidden City, but only just. Past this, you're in stable country. Goat country. Literal goat country. Your new work site? A narrow stretch of storage pavilions used for overflow scrolls, backup ceremonial garments, and the Emperor's collection of duplicate pottery. It's thrilling. There are no royal guests here. No concubines passing through. Just crates, dust, and a suspicious smell wafting from the storage cellar labeled "Don't Open." You light your first lantern on a crooked hook beside a stack of unused thunder drums. The flame tilts sideways as if embarrassed. Later that night, you're sitting on a crate, sipping tepid barley tea, when a voice calls out, "Lantern boy." You flinch. It's an old stable hand, leading a small herd of goats through the adjacent corridor. "Need you to light the back corridor. Goats won't walk through shadow." You follow, lantern swinging. Sure enough, the goats freeze just before the dark stretch. You light 3 soft amber lamps in a row, and the animals glide through like silk on stone. The stable hand pats your shoulder. "You're better than the last guy. He tried singing." You chuckle, but inwardly you're sulking. This was supposed to be a rise. You were lighting poetry readings, imperial ceremonies, even the Emperor's private study. Now you're illuminating goat paths. The next few days blur together in tedium. You adjust flame heights in empty storerooms. Replace wicks on moth-eaten ceremonial lanterns. You consider carving your name into the bench, but someone already did. 6 times. You begin to suspect this is where good lantern keepers go to be forgotten. And then, something curious happens. You find a lantern you've never seen before. It's tucked into a crate marked miscellaneous repairs, wrapped in faded brocade. You unroll it carefully. The frame is unfamiliar, heavier than the others, carved in concentric rings of ivory and lacquer. The silk is stitched with a pattern you don't recognize, interlocking spirals forming a perfect circle. The tassels are dark green. The oil dish is empty, but still smells faintly of cloves and something sharper. You light it. The flame blooms slowly, as if waking from a nap. Then it settles into a tight, strong glow, unusually steady. You notice something even stranger. The shadows it casts aren't soft or diffuse. They're precise. Edges sharp as ink lines. And on the wall opposite, the light forms a distinct image, a map. Not of the palace. Of the garden paths. The hidden ones. You trace it with your finger, matching what you remember from forbidden corners. The angles match. The gates align. One path leads directly beneath the Empress's winter hall. You douse the flame. The next day, you return early, crate in hand, and ask Master Hui if he knows it. He looks at it, says nothing for a long time. Finally, he mutters, "That's a whisper lantern. Made only by the old guild. Used to deliver messages the wind wasn't meant to carry." Why was it here, you ask? Because someone wanted it forgotten. Historians still argue whether the exile of lantern keepers like you is punishment or precaution. You're beginning to think it's both. Because now, you're outside the circle, but seeing deeper than ever. You start lighting intentionally again. Not just for function, but to see what the flames reveal. Every cracked frame might hold a secret. Every misaligned hook, a pattern. A week later, the steward visits. Looks around your little outpost. Notices your lanterns burn steady, your paths are clean, even the goats seem more obedient. He says, "You're useful here." You nod. But inside, your mind's already miles ahead, mapping paths and light, sketching spirals in your notebook, waiting. You're not just the exile. You're the flame they forgot to watch. There's a list posted on the outer wall of the Office of Ceremonial Affairs, a tightly rolled scroll unfurled and pinned by 2 brass tacks. It's the official lineup for the Festival of 10,000 Lights, the grandest, most theatrical, and most nerve-twisting lantern event of the Qing imperial year. You skim the names half-heartedly at first, still stuck in goat duty mode. But then your eyes stop. You're on it. Not just on it, your name's assigned next to a single, terrifying phrase, design and execution, Lantern Maze, Northern Garden Grove. This is the big one. The maze is a centerpiece of the festival, a sprawling, winding series of lantern-lit paths built in the outermost palace garden, designed to impress dignitaries, amuse the court, and test the patience of every craftsman assigned to it. The maze is changed every year. No repeats. No shortcuts. Only light, space, and the careful weaving of imperial symbolism and controlled chaos. You're still blinking at the scroll when a courier hands you a second document, a folded schematic of the garden grounds. The message is simple. Begin layout immediately. Emperor will walk it. Of course he will. You're given 3 assistants and exactly 8 nights to build something worthy of being both walked and remembered. And you're told, with no irony, try not to set the shrubbery on fire this time. The first step is mapping. You walk the garden 3 times, pacing out the main path, side routes, blind ends, and scenic overlooks. You begin sketching, curved corridors that funnel light, pockets for surprise lantern reveals, open spaces where wide-frame lanterns will create the illusion of floating. Every twist in the maze needs to mean something. Light must guide, mislead, charm, warn. You make decisions, red lanterns to signal warmth and correct passage. Blue lanterns to misdirect. Green to reward a pause. White only at the end, to symbolize arrival. Then come the designs. You draft dozens of lanterns, some round, some rectangular, some hexagonal like snowflakes. You bring in artisans to help carve frames and stretch silk. You commission special motifs, fish for luck, bats for hidden fortune, plum blossoms for perseverance. You even request one lantern shaped like a tiger curled in a ball, meant to cast long, strange shadows as guests pass. Every evening you test flame blends. Wind-resistant oils. Triple wicked lanterns for focal points. You spend one entire night arguing with a tassel maker over whether coral thread flares too orange in moonlight. It does. Halfway through the build, a new edict arrives. The maze must include a moment of imperial reflection. That's court code for something that makes the emperor feel transcendent, clever, and possibly divine. You design a mirror chamber, a short curved path lit only by soft white flames behind translucent glass, flanked by lanterns that reflect themselves into infinity. When walked, the emperor will see his silhouette reflected over and over, slowly converging into one central glow. You install it at midnight, hands trembling. That same night, a senior official visits to inspect progress. He walks the maze silently, eyes narrowed, brow pinched. He pauses at your decoy path lined in twisting serpent lanterns and smirks. A bit bold, no? Only for those who choose wrongly, you say. He walks on. The final test comes 3 nights before the festival. The Empress Dowager herself is escorted through the unfinished path. She walks slowly, expression unreadable. When she emerges, she looks you in the eye and says, "There was quiet, even where there wasn't." You don't know if that's approval, but she doesn't order it dismantled. So, the night of the festival arrives like a dragon uncoiling. Fireworks crackle above the palace roofs. The air smells of incense, roasted chestnuts, sugar-glazed lotus, and expectation. The entire Forbidden City pulses with lantern light, reds and golds, blues and violet flares shimmering over rooftops. The sky reflects the ground. The ground reflects you. And your maze? It glows. You've placed over 800 lanterns. They sway in careful rhythm as guests move through, following paths, doubling back, whispering in delight or frustration. Children laugh at the flickering animal forms. Officials pause at the reflection chamber. Somewhere, a flute plays. Then the moment comes. The emperor steps into the maze. You watch from the shadows, heart a gong in your chest. He walks deliberately, slowly, turning where intended, pausing when prompted. When he reaches the mirror chamber, he stops. Long enough for you to feel the burn in your lungs. Then he walks on. At the exit, he says nothing. But he lifts a hand and points upward. A single sky lantern is released, a private imperial signal. You're told later it means well-made journey. That's all you need. Later, as guests drift away and the court retires, you walk the maze alone. The flames are lower now, quieter. The path's still lit, but softer. You run your hand along the lantern pole. Feel the warmth in the wood. You've done something rare. Not just performed your duty, but bent flame, shadow, scent, and silk into something momentary and unforgettable. You think of all the versions of yourself that lit these paths. The soot-streaked novice. The exile among goats. The silent observer. The quiet craftsman. Now here you are, the unseen guide through 10,000 lights. You douse the final flame and walk out under the stars. You wake up the next morning with sore hands, an aching back, and the faint scent of sesame oil woven into your robe like a personal legacy. Outside your window, the remnants of the festival of 10,000 lights drift on the breeze, burnt wicks, a forgotten tassel, the occasional petal from a crushed celebration bloom. It feels like the city is exhaling. Today, you've been given no assignment. No scroll. No courier knocking before dawn. Just a soft note tucked under your door that reads, "Return your lantern kit when convenient. Your service has been noted." That's it. Not exactly a fanfare. But in palace language, it's practically a standing ovation. You walk through the outer corridors, your steps slower now, almost reverent. There's a finality in the rhythm of your feet. You pass one of your earlier creations, an old hexagonal lantern with faded fish and frayed fringe. Still hanging. Still lit. It sways slightly in the breeze like it remembers you. Your path takes you across the Vermilion Steps Bridge, the first lantern line you ever lit. You remember the panic, the slippery ladder, the breath held between matches. You smile at the memory, and maybe wince, just a little. There's no one waiting at the workshop when you arrive. Just your cart, sitting by the door like a dog that's forgotten its master's footsteps. You run your hand across the wood, then gently place your wick trimmers, your oil flasks, your last few scent sachets back into their tray. One by one. Like laying offerings at a shrine. You don't quite return everything, though. In your robe, you keep one item, a single silk panel, no bigger than your palm. Soft white, embroidered with a spiral and fading thread. The old keeper called it just scrap. You think otherwise. As you walk back, you take the long way, past the gardens, through a side corridor where the shadows still fall perfectly because of a mirror lantern you adjusted weeks ago. No one ever noticed. But you did. Someone once told you a good lantern makes a room glow. A great lantern makes a person feel illuminated. You've lit thousands. Some warm, some strange, some that whispered secrets from ancient guilds and hidden corridors. And you've watched as they revealed not just walls and faces, but power, grief, longing, politics, poetry, silence. You were always in the background, the quiet hand behind the flame. And now, that final lantern awaits. It's already hung outside the Hall of Whispering Echoes, suspended from a carved beam shaped like a phoenix wing. It's your farewell piece, though no one said so aloud. Circular frame. Deep amber silk. Inside, no emblem. No painted scene. Just light. Plain. Pure. Clear. You light it with your last match. The flame flickers, then settles, steady as a breath. You bow. Not to anyone in particular. Just to the work. To the years. To the glow you leave behind. You turn. And walk away.